Alrighty, we are on to week 120K, technically. December 12th, 1941, World War II. Hitler declares war on the USA and the Jews. Okay. I am not going to be watching the Pearl Harbor minute by minute episodes. That's way too much Pearl Harbor. I don't need all of that. I don't care. So, we're just gonna continue on as normal. Let's dive in.
Pearl were attacked this morning? Uh-huh. Yeah, of course we won't be attacked. Come on, we're not that dumb. December 12th, 1941. This week, an event of major, game-changing significance happens. This week, Germany declares war on the United States.
Dun dun dun.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is World War II. Before I say anything else, yes, I am very much aware that this week is also the week that Japan attacks the U.S. Pacific Fleet at anchor in Pearl Harbor. Now, I am going to talk about that today and the other Japanese attacks all over Southeast Asia and the Pacific, but not in any great detail. The reason being that 5 days ago, we released 10 half-hour episodes. That's 5 hours of minute-by-minute coverage of Pearl Harbor and those other attacks on this channel. So you can go and watch that for detail. Anywho, last week, the Red Army finally stopped the German drive on Moscow at its very gates. The exhausted and battered Germans just could not reach the city. The Soviets then began a massive counterattack along an 800-kilometer front as the week ended. In North Africa, Axis Commander Erwin Rommel is in a bit of trouble as Operation Crusader begins to turn in the Allies' favor, and Japanese troop transports in the South China Sea mean they are going to attack someone. But who? Malaya? Thailand? The Dutch East Indies? The Philippines? Who?
Yes.
It turns out that the answer to that is everyone.
Yeah.
Saturday the 6th, just after midday in Washington, D.C.,
Yikes.
in the Navy's cryptographic department, Dorothy Edgers translates an intercepted Japanese diplomatic message. The magic program has broken this particular code, as I've talked about before. It was sent on the 2nd to Japanese Consul General Kita in Honolulu from Tokyo and asks him to send them regular reports of all ship movements at Pearl Harbor, comings and goings, and berthing positions. She gets alarmed by this and translates some more intercepts, which turn out to be along the same lines. At 3 p.m., she brings this to Alvin Kramer, chief of the translation department. He looks it over and says they'll get back to it on Monday the 8th. By then, it will be very much unnecessary, because the next day, Sunday, December 7th, already the 8th in the Far East, Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, invades Thailand and British Malaya, launches aerial attacks versus Hong Kong, Guam, the Philippines, Shanghai, Singapore, and Wake Island. War with the United States and the British Empire has instantly begun. 6 carriers bearing over 400 planes with supporting battleships and destroyers launched the Pearl Harbor attack, which comes in 2 waves. The U.S. has 8 battleships in port this morning, and all take damage. Arizona explodes, Oklahoma capsizes, West Virginia and California sink, Nevada runs aground. By the end of the morning, only 2 of the battleships capable of action earlier that morning are still capable of it. Pennsylvania is in dry dock. Japan's total of 10 battleships and 6 carriers are unquestionably now the masters of the Pacific. The oil storage tanks and general base installations are not destroyed, however, because Japanese Admiral Nagumo does not allow a 3rd wave of the attacks. So the Americans at least still have the infrastructure of the port in place.
What's the point? Because then you can just fix everything. Why not do the 3rd wave?
Many smaller vessels are damaged or sunk, and nearly 200 planes destroyed for a total cost of 29 Japanese planes and 5 midget submarines in what is a preemptive strike to knock out the only Navy in any position to sabotage the other Japanese attacks. The general Japanese offensive battle plan, far, far to the east, provides for 4 divisions of the Japanese 25th Army to advance into Malaya towards Singapore after landing in Thailand, 2 divisions of the 15th Army to move into Burma from Thailand, and 2.5 divisions of the 14th Army to take the Philippines. The attacks begin simultaneously in general, and some even before the Pearl Harbor attack. Japan takes the Gilbert Islands. The Battle of Hong Kong begins. The Malayan Campaign begins. The Battle of Prachuap-Khiri begins. Japanese forces take the American garrisons at Shanghai and Tianjin. One thing I did not go into much detail in the Pearl Harbor coverage a few days ago is the Philippines situation this day. The Philippines still belong to the U.S. At 10 a.m. in Hawaii, as the attacks there end, it's 4 a.m. the 8th in the Philippines. Douglas MacArthur, commanding there, gets word of the Pearl Harbor attack and that the Philippines might also be a target. General Louis Barraton, commanding the Far East Air Force, wants to send his B-17s to raid Japanese Formosa, which is now Taiwan. He is denied permission by MacArthur's Chief of Staff, Richard Sutherland, who says they don't know what they'll find there. At 6:12 a.m., though, they get word that Japanese carrier planes are bombing an American ship at Davao, which is plenty of justification for a preemptive raid on Formosa. But MacArthur still does not give the order.
Hold up. MacArthur is the one holding back? Same MacArthur that wanted to nuke Korea and China. He's holding back against the Japanese. Huh? What?
Philippine President Manuel Quezon will later claim that MacArthur's refusal to act is because he thinks the Philippines will not be attacked. MacArthur himself will say he had no doubt they would be attacked, but that he never gets Barraton's request, though Army records clearly show that he does get it. Whatever the case, I will let John Costello say it. There can be little doubt that MacArthur's failure to act that morning contributed to the disaster that overtook his command. The Philippines might not have been saved if Barraton had been allowed to make the preemptive raid, but the Japanese bombers were grounded by weather, sitting ducks for the American B-17s.
Damn.
All 400 of those Japanese planes are, in fact, grounded by fog when they should be hitting the Luzon airfields according to plan. Their admiral is certain that Pearl Harbor retaliation will bring a rain of destruction down on his planes. But it never comes. At 7:15, Barraton tries again after getting a call from Washington to not get caught with his planes on the ground like at Pearl. When a radar blip announces incoming planes, he scrambles a big force, but it's recalled when it's a false alarm. Sutherland will still not authorize an attack on Formosa, though. At 9 a.m., 32 Japanese bombers that have managed to take off begin bombing the airfields in northern Luzon. 192 more Japanese planes are now also able to take off. It's 350 kilometers to the Philippines. By noon, the American pilots go off duty for lunch with all of their planes on the ground.
Oh no.
By 1:37 p.m., only 17 B-17 Flying Fortresses survive the Japanese raids, and 3/4 of all of the fighters are destroyed. In half an hour,
I don't understand any possible logical. There's no logic for why those planes did not get permission to take off. I don't understand any possible logic from MacArthur to what's his face, the Sutherland. I don't understand this. How this. What?
The Japanese had won the air superiority needed to ensure the successful invasion of the Philippines. Barraton soon gets calls wondering how the hell he could have allowed this to happen. On the 10th, 80 Japanese medium bombers returned from Formosa, and the 35 P-40s sent up cannot stop them nor the successive waves that kill 500 people and destroy them.
If I were Barraton, I would have crashed out and just quit and been like, hey, I tried. Y'all didn't listen. Peace. I'm petty like that, though.
Cavite Naval Yard and the Asiatic Fleet's entire reserve supply of torpedoes. Submarines were the last hope of stopping the invasion transports heading for the Philippines. The Japanese soon land at Batan Island north of Luzon and begin building an airfield. MacArthur has some 130,000 men, 20,000 of them Americans. This force is not as trained or experienced as the Japanese, though. Now, his plan, in case of attack, had been to use his planes to disrupt Japanese landings, then retreat to Bataan Peninsula and await the Pacific Fleet. Neither part of this plan is now remotely doable. Over half of the Far East Air Force was destroyed in just the first strike, the rest mostly taken care of over the next few days, and there is not much of an American Pacific Fleet now able to come to the rescue. Near midnight in Germany, when he gets the news of Pearl Harbor, Adolf Hitler says, "Now it is impossible for us to lose the war. We now have an ally who's never been vanquished in 3,000 years." On the 8th at 4:10 p.m., American President Franklin Roosevelt signs the declaration of war against Japan. This is actually 2 hours after Britain's House of Commons declares war on Japan. Many other nations soon follow suit, or indeed have already done so. Canada was actually the first to do so just after the attack on Hong Kong began. Canadian units are part of the garrison there. Roosevelt delivers his famous Day of Infamy speech on the 8th, but he does not ask Congress to declare war on Germany and Italy. In fact, the US and Germany still maintain diplomatic relations. Yep. Hitler is told on the 9th in Berlin that Roosevelt does not want a war on two oceans. There is actually a fair amount of uncertainty in the world's high commands in general on the 8th and 9th. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill wants to go meet Roosevelt in D.C. straight away. British Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden is against this, and Roosevelt is too. He doesn't want to receive Churchill while the U.S. is not at war with Germany. He's waiting on Hitler to make that declaration or not make that declaration, not wanting to start a divisive debate in Congress about which ocean would have priority. German high command is divided too. With the drive on Moscow stalled for the foreseeable future, there is a pretty good case to be made against diving into a war with the United States. And since Japan started things, Germany is not bound to declare war under the Tripartite Pact. And Japan started a lot of things. On the 9th, China officially declares war on Japan, also on Germany and Italy, 4.5 years after being invaded by Japan. Chiang Kai-shek has not done so until now because American neutrality laws would have prevented access to American supplies. Bangkok is occupied by the Japanese, and landings are made at Tarawa and Makin Islands in the Gilbert Islands. On the 10th, British battlecruiser Repulse and battleship Prince of Wales are sunk by the Japanese in the South China Sea by 84 torpedo-carrying planes. 840 men drown. 4 planes are shot down. These 2 capital ships of Force Z, or Force Z if you're British, I guess, were to hunt down and destroy...
If you're wrong, it's Z, not Z. Why are you adding an ED to the Z? Z. 1 Z. That's it. Not fucking Z. Stupid.
Japanese troop transports, but they themselves have been the targets of a massive air and sea search. This is a huge deal. 2 capital ships of the Royal Navy sunk in 1 day, one of them brand new. Sir Alan Brooke, recently appointed British Chief of the Imperial General Staff, has this to say. It means that from Africa eastward to America, through the Indian Ocean and the Pacific, we have lost control of the sea.
Oh.
On the 11th, Germany finally declares war on the United States, as does Italy. The U.S. returns the favor. That day, American forces repel a Japanese landing at Wake Island. 2 Japanese destroyers are sunk, killing 5,350 men.
Damn.
3 Japanese bombers are shot down as well. The Japanese invade Burma, and at the end of the week come Japanese landings on southern Philippine Islands. India declares war on Japan. Romania declares war on the United States and Britain. The battle for the Pacific will continue as the months roll on. But the battle for Moscow is over. Hitler has finally accepted the need to pull back from the untenable front lines near the city. In fact, on the 8th, he issues Directive 39. ordering the German forces in the USSR to immediately go over to the defensive. It is also made clear that wherever they withdraw, they must destroy all buildings and all villages. Wehrmacht Chief Wilhelm Keitel tells Army Group North, in the interests of the military operations, there is to be no respect whatsoever for the population's situation.
I mean, they didn't seem to really have any sort of respect for the population situation from the get. That's still a very fucked up thing to say in the...
They're on the defensive already, though, as the Soviets counterattacked at the end of last week. The Kalinin, Western, and Southwestern fronts have fresh tanks and fresh troops. The plan with all of the attacks is to cut through the panzer wings of Army Group Center and then isolate and destroy it. This is Red Army Commander Georgy Zhukov's baby. By the 8th, the Germans are outside artillery range of Moscow as the Red Army takes Krasnaya Poliana, Kryukovo, and Kamenka. By the 11th, Heinz Guderian is forced back to Stalinogorsk. The counteroffensive is quite impressive. In fact, by the 11th, Soviet forces have recaptured 400 towns and villages in the past 5 days. Churchill tells the House of Commons, in Hitler's launching of the Nazi campaign on Russia, we can already see, after less than 6 months of fighting, that he has made one of the outstanding blunders of history. There are those who say his declaring war on the United States is another of them. The Germans are withdrawing to a line from Rzhev, Medin, Orel, Kursk. The battle for Moscow is over. Another bright spot for the Soviets is that the Kharkov Tank Works produces its first 25 T-34 tanks this week in the Ural Mountains. It is under 10 weeks since the factory and its engineers were relocated there from Kharkov. In the north of the Eastern Front, the Soviets have retaken Tikhvin and forced the Germans into a brief retreat up there. Still, rations in nearby Leningrad, under siege since September, are below starvation and very little can get in. Some 50,000 people will die there this month. There is another siege that ends this week in North Africa. On the 7th, in the face of growing Allied strength on the ground and Allied superiority in the skies, Axis commander Erwin Rommel decides to disengage and pull back to Gazala. On the 10th, after 8 months under siege by Rommel's forces, Tobruk is finally relieved. You can guess the effect this has on British morale. But this also opens up the airfields at Tobruk, El Adem, and Sidi Rezeg to the Desert Air Force, who can now cover the army way beyond El Adem and cover supply ships entering Tobruk. 1 day earlier, both sides, coincidentally, reorganized their commands. Rommel becomes field commander of all Axis forces in the theater. And on the Allied side, 13th Corps is made responsible for all operations in Cyrenaica. And 30th Corps, minus the 7th Armored Division, will watch and hold the frontier. Since Alfred Godwin Austin has his headquarters at Tobruk, and since they want to give the Axis no respite, he is given control of 13th Corps. On the 11th, the 4th Armored Brigade and the 4th Indian Division join him at Tobruk, and the 30th Corps heads back to Egypt. This reorganization and the end of the siege at Tobruk mark the end of Phase 3 of Operation Crusader. And here are some notes to end the week. On the 6th, American Government Subcommittee S1 meets in D.C. Its task over the next 6 months is to establish if an atomic bomb can be produced in the U.S., and if so, when and what would it cost. That same day, Britain declares war on Finland. On the 7th comes Hitler's Night and Fog Decree, Nacht und Nebel, issued to German secret forces. This allows them to arrest and detain anyone whom they judge to be a threat to Germany, without being required to give any information about why they take them. So those arrested by the Gestapo
weren't they already doing that? It's just now legal?
Will now just vanish, leaving their friends and families with the dilemma of whether or not to inquire and thus risk being also implicated in whatever the crime was. On the 8th, Sergeant Harold Cole, a British deserter at Dunkirk, helps the Germans break one of the major secret lines the Allies use to get pilots and POWs out of France and into neutral Spain. As a result of his actions,
What a bitch.
50 people who helped maintain the line are arrested and shot. After the declaration of war on the US and the Nacht und Nebel decree, Hitler meets with the Nazi Party leadership on December 12th, and in that meeting, he orders the beginning of the program to annihilate all Jews of Europe from west to east. Spartacus covers that in the War Against Humanity episode for early December. Well, that brings us to the end of what can only be called a pivotal week of the war. The Germans are on the defensive and on the retreat in the USSR. Tobruk is free and Rommel is pulling back in North Africa. And the Japanese have invaded a whole bunch of places in Southeast Asia and the Pacific and have succeeded in bringing the United States into the war. It's true that Hitler was under no obligation to declare war on the US. And it's not like they're any immediate threat to him anyhow. And he's been a little sour on the Japanese lately as well, since they've refused to attack the USSR from the east to help out his campaign against the Soviets. And, until this week, have not made any moves against Singapore despite his repeated pleas for that. Roosevelt does not ask for a declaration of war against Germany and the beginning of a two-ocean war either. But Hitler has now made his declaration and the die is cast. The US has other fish to fry before focusing on Hitler, of course, chief among them being revenge and how to hold the Philippines. But the events of this week in the Far East have greatly changed the war. Well, greatly changed the world. I don't know who will win in the long run or who will end up controlling which territory. But one thing I can guarantee, as a result of the Japanese attacks this week, there will be a death toll from them in the millions, perhaps even the tens of millions. That much is terrifyingly obvious.
Yeah.
If you missed our blockbuster...
And that was week 120K, December 12, 1941. Hitler declares war on the USA and the Jews. That was a good episode. This might be one of the better. I think this is one of the best ones so far on this series. I definitely think it was better done than the opening of Barbarossa a few months ago. That one was kind of meh. I think they got too bogged down into the details, and I'm sure that might be the same problem that I wouldn't be surprised if that's a similar issue in the 5-hour episode, the 30-minute episodes of December 7th. / December 8th. Hey, this one was good. This gave me similar vibes to the invasion of France, which was also a really good couple episodes. So yeah, on to the next one, 121.